With groups in the technology, media and telco sectors grappling with constant evolution in their markets and the wider tax and regulatory environment, many are struggling to focus and prioritise their efforts in dealing with international tax policy changes in train. So with that, I'm delighted to be joined by Megha Menon from our TMT International Tax Practice here in the UK and Alistair Pepper from our Washington National Tax Practice in the US. So starting with you, Alistair, there's been a lot of focus clearly on the global minimum tax, Pillar 2, and for groups getting to understand the impacts and starting to prepare for that. But of course we've got Pillar 1, which hasn't been forgotten about, and there has been some movement. Can you give us an update on where things currently stand and where things are likely to move going forwards?
So Pillar 1 is the OECD's effort to develop an alternative to digital services taxes. There was a recent publication of a draft Amount A MLC by the OECD in October. If introduced, that would change the way that profit allocation rules work for large multinationals with profit margins in excess of 10% and revenues in excess of 20 billion euros. The OECD is now in a kind of holding phase, and we're really looking to the US and whether the US is going to be able to implement the Amount A MLC. The US Treasury is consulting, that consultation closes in December, and I think that will give us a good indication of whether or not Amount A is likely to be supported by the US and ultimately implemented. If it's not, then I think next year will be the year of DSTs, and we'll see a proliferation of DSTs and potentially an expansion in their scope as countries look to see what they want to get out of the digital and tech sector. There's also Amount B. Amount B is a separate part of Pillar 1. It's about the simplification of transfer pricing rules with a focus on distribution activities. There we're expecting a further announcement from the OECD in January. And I think it's feasible that Amount B and Amount A could separate, with Amount B being implemented and the future of Amount A remaining uncertain.
Okay, interesting. And Megha, in terms of your clients in the TMT sector, how far are they on their BEPS journey? And what are they thinking about in terms of next steps?
Yeah, so obviously there's a lot of pressure on December year-end groups because they are really the first movers when Pillar 2 kicks in. But really there are a few categories of issues that clients are thinking about. So the first one really is, can they get into the safe harbour rules so they can ease their compliance burden for the next few years? The second one is really, well, do they have an assessment under Pillar 2 when it becomes effective? And then to the extent they do have top-up taxation, can they access things like the UTPR safe harbour? For example, US multinationals can access that. Or do they do some sort of restructuring or reorganisation in order to maybe salvage some of the top-up taxation? The other area that we are helping clients with is support with discussions with their auditors, as there's a lot of pressure around that. And I suppose the fifth category is really around M&A deals. At the moment, the environment in the M&A market is quite slow. However, the impact of Pillar 2 on a deal is quite important for heads of tax and the broader tax teams to consider.
And of course, companies in the TMT sector are typically extremely IP and data rich. What are the kind of things that they should be thinking about in terms of IP asset ownership and operating model?
Yeah, so TMT as a sector is IP rich and they rely on IP for their growth strategy. So having a robust IP tax strategy is very important. And in this current environment, I suppose with Pillar 2 coming in, what clients might be thinking about is that there is minimum taxation and therefore likely the ETR potentially goes up. But if we think about what BEPS 1 was trying to do, that was really about aligning substance with IP, and Pillar 2 brings in minimum taxation. However, what I say to most of my clients is we do have an opportunity to think about how system profits are distributed around the world. And you could then think about getting tax value in a different way through utilization of attributes, above the line credits, which all work under a Pillar 2 environment.
And so there's a lot there to think about. So where do you think tax leaders should be really in terms of where they want to be at the end of the year and thinking ahead beyond that as well? And let's start with you, Alistair.
So I think from Pillar 2, the first thing you want to do is you want to make sure you finish your Pillar 2 modelling and that you're happy with that modelling. You then want to think about, what do I need to report in FY24? What are the first things I'm going to need to do from an interim reporting perspective? You want to think about, what do I do from a long-term compliance standpoint? How am I going to get my data and systems in place that I'm going to make the compliance as simple as possible? And then who do I need to speak to? Who should I be communicating with? Have I communicated the impact appropriately? Have I made sure I've got the right resources for the additional compliance burden that I'm going to face? On a Pillar 1 side, I think we're thinking more about the potential impact rather than putting in place that compliance resource at this stage. So on amount A, will it happen? If it won't happen, then we're likely to see that proliferation of DSTs. What does that mean for my business? On amount B is thinking about what would the implications be if, at the beginning of next year, the OECD were to reach agreement on that simplification of transfer pricing rules.
And Megha, thoughts from you?
Yeah, so I think what I tell a lot of my clients is, with all the legislative changes that Alistair just mentioned, and a lot of uncertainty in the next few years, it is really important to test the resilience of your tax operating model in the current environment, and that will tell you where your pitfalls and opportunities are likely to be. And on that, we do offer like a short workshop for clients that they can be well prepared for that.
Yeah. And you know, it's interesting that there's such a lot of change that's still ongoing. Groups just bedding in terms of their Pillar 2, looking to finalise impact assessments, and we're now moving into thinking about on a dynamic basis, factoring in what could be the Pillar 1 impacts and DST impacts going forward. So plenty for groups to think about. So with that, thank you very much, Alistair and Megha, for all of your insights. Much appreciated.